We all have that one special video game, something that introduces us to the world of gaming and paves the way for a hobby that follows us for a lifetime. For me, that game is The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. Being able to explore a creative and mysterious world left a lasting impression for a little 4-year-old gator. So for that reason, I'd like to make this my first review here on Bytes. I'm your host for today, L8RG8R2U, and in today's episode, we'll be discussing the pros and cons of The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. We'll start off this review with arguably the most important part of any game, the gameplay. Regardless of which version you're playing, Link's Awakening is very beginner-friendly. The game starts off nice and easy, allowing you to explore the peaceful Mabe village to get used to the controls before setting you off to more dangerous regions. The enemies themselves are fairly simplistic early on, oftentimes allowing those who don't really like combat to avoid fighting altogether if they want, but you'll want to fight the enemies occasionally as they will always drop something useful, whether it's a ruby, replenishable weapon like an arrow, or even power-ups that raise your offense or defense. Of course, exploration is a key part of any Zelda game. While it may not be quite as open as something like Breath of the Wild or A Link Between Worlds, you're still given a pretty vast world to explore in the palm of your hands. The story progression itself is pretty linear, with no real options to play dungeons in any order, but the amount of side activities really open up as the game goes on. Whether you're collecting dozens of secret seashells or tracking down the next item for an expensive trading side quest, there's usually always something for you to do. Exploration is where the Switch version really shines. While I personally don't mind the screen transitioning on the Game Boy versions, this may be harder to ignore for newcomers, as the game takes a split second to load each screen, which can be pretty repetitive when you're traveling long distances, but on the Switch version, especially when you've gained access to the Pegasus boots fairly early on in the game, you'll be running around this beautiful world at breakneck speeds. The Nintendo Switch version also takes the cake for collectibles. There's more heart pieces and secret seashells to find than before, some of which even hidden in places where the original had Easter eggs. Which is always fun for those like me who've replayed this game dozens of times. The remake even adds some new collectibles in the form of the Mabe Village figurines and the chamber dungeons. Speaking of chamber dungeons, let's discuss those for a moment. This is a completely new feature which allows you to create your own dungeons using rooms from those that you've explored throughout the story. There's plenty of scenarios for you to solve, such as setting up dungeons to match specific shapes. Although the downside is the only way to share the creations is by scanning an amiibo figure and taking them to a friend's console. While this is definitely a downside for those who want to share their creations, personally speaking, this doesn't bother me, since sharing dungeons online could be the basis for an entirely new game. What does bother me is how limited the feature is at first. Because you have to progress through the story to unlock new chambers, you're limited in which rooms to build for a while, often repeating layouts to finish scenarios. And you can only progress so far in the scenarios at a time, which can also be discouraging for those seeking to 100% this mode. What's really odd is a large chunk of the scenarios only become available after finishing the last dungeon, so it felt like needless padding towards the end, especially since some chamber rooms need to be purchased from the town tool shop, which can get very expensive. Overall, I really enjoyed the chamber dungeons, although for those seeking 100% completion, you'll get the most enjoyment from this mode by waiting until later to finish it. On the Game Boy version, it's worth mentioning that the space where Dombe's chamber dungeon building sits used to be the location of a picture shop. In this version, you can get special pictures throughout the adventure, but unfortunately this doesn't return in the remake. The last thing I'll touch in terms of gameplay is replayability. Outside of going for 100% completion, Link's Awakening is filled with hundreds of Easter eggs. Even though I've been playing the game for almost 20 years, I'm always finding something new every time I play through it. The story of Link's Awakening is the closest the Zelda series gets to feeling like Earthbound. What I mean by that is that it feels lighthearted on the surface, and for the most part that is the case. But there's the occasional dark moment which will stay in your mind for a long time. We obviously won't go into spoilers or anything like that for the game's story, but the major plot twist, while a commonly used one in writing, is handled so well that you almost forget how much of a cliche it is. Of all the stories in the Zelda series, this is definitely one of my favorites. While it may not be as deep as something like Xenoblade Chronicles, Link's Awakening will stay with you for years to come. The music in Link's Awakening is absolutely charming. Whether you're hearing the peaceful melodies of Mabe Village, the adventurous feeling of Koholint's overworld, or the absolutely adorable Animal Village theme, this may very well be one of my favorite soundtracks in the Zelda series, and the absolutely beautiful Ballad of the Windfish remains a personal favorite of mine. I especially love how the Nintendo Switch version faithfully reproduces the same feeling of the original music, while having the sound quality of a live performance. Which soundtrack is better between the Game Boy and Switch version is really a matter of personal preference. Although personally speaking, I would have preferred to have the option to play the original Game Boy soundtrack in the Switch version, but it's fine without it. The only song I really don't care that much for would be the theme for the 4th dungeon, which is just a sped up version of the cave theme that repeats far too often. The Switch version is still a little bit repetitive, but it's far more tolerable. The graphics are amazing on both Game Boy and Switch. Personally speaking, the Game Boy version has some of my favorite sprite work of any classic game, although it's probably nostalgia bias speaking. It's not hard to tell what everything is supposed to be, and the environments look different enough that you'll rarely ever get lost. And holy sweet Hylia, is the Switch version absolutely gorgeous. You could almost reach right into your Switch/TV screen and start playing with all the little toys that make up the world. I know there's a lot of people who don't care that much for the art style, but I think it works wonders for adapting this game into an HD world. The only downside I can think of would be this weird blur effect on the bottom of the screen, although it's not enough to distract from this beautiful world. Also, that water. Just, wow, HD Koholint is pretty. The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening is a very special game that's perfect for both newcomers and longtime Zelda veterans. This is something I honestly believe everybody should experience at least once in their lifetime, and with the Nintendo Switch version now available, it's easier than ever to experience this absolutely dream of a game. I award Link's Awakening a perfect 5 out of 5. Thank you all for watching this episode of Game Bytes. I've been your host, L8RG8R2U, and I would recommend my Link's Awakening Let's Play, but that's very old and very terrible, so instead I'm going to recommend my Majora's Mask 3D Let's Play. Thank you all so much for watching this episode, and until next time, L8RG8R2U.